time for another episode of Shield Hero Cut Content, a series where I go through every episode of the anime and highlight some of the most important cutscenes and prominent changes from both the manga and the light novels. Last time we stopped halfway through episode 5, right before Philo was introduced to the story. So if we pick up from there, it covers the last bits of chapters 9 and 10 in the manga and the same initial chapters from volume 2 in the light novel. Starting from when Philo hatches, by chance, Naofumi finds out that he can use pieces of her cracked egg to unlock a couple new shields, from which he gains the Monster User Shield and the Monster Egg Shield. The Monster User Shields are pretty much the same as the Slave User Shields, except instead of adjusting how your slave grows, these gave the ability to adjust how your monster grows. Then the Monster Egg Shield had an equip bonus of increased cooking proficiency. Now, after seeing Philo for the first time, Naofumi was unsure as to what kind of bird he was looking at. Initially, he thinks it's a piku, which is described as a deformed condor that can't fly very well. But it's later identified by a villager to be a Philolio. After hearing this, Naofumi was pretty happy, cause turns out his gamble had paid off. The egg had cost 100 silver coins, but now that he had a Philolio, he could easily sell it for at least 200. The villager also mentions that Philolios tend to get agitated when they aren't pulling something heavy. You know, something like a cart. Naofumi found this to be pretty strange, but apparently it's in their nature. Something about the Philolios relating it to carrying around their nest and eggs, which is likely the reason why Philo is always mentioning how happy she is to be pulling around the cart. Anyway, the villager even goes on to offer Naofumi some beans to feed Philo with, which kinda shocked him because Naofumi wasn't used to being on the receiving end of random acts of kindness. After all, the majority of the city still saw him as a villain. So the sincerity of the farmer and the recent warmth that he's been receiving from the people of the village was like a breath of fresh air. Naofumi was even starting to feel a little bit better these days, wondering if it was a direct result of what Raphtalia did back at the castle. It's after this that in the light novel, our new team decides to head to the swamp in order to level up. There they come across a monster called a big frog. It's during this encounter that we get to see a bit of a different type of chemistry between Naofumi and Raphtalia. You see, Naofumi just wanted to be cautious, cause he didn't know how strong or what level this thing was, but Raphtalia, she just wanted to kill it ASAP. So instead of going with Naofumi's plan to have him pin it down while she could safely attack, she kept rushing in, trying to slay it as fast as possible, but of course to no success. This was the first time that they didn't seem in sync with each other. I mean, up until this point, they were able to fight side by side no problem, but now, it seemed like they weren't even on the same page. Eventually, they did manage to slay the frog, but only after finally pinning it down and having Raphtalia take a clean shot at it. It's after that Raphtalia expressed her disappointment towards Naofumi. You see, although Naofumi wanted to be cautious, Raphtalia was worried that there wasn't enough time between waves, and that they should be defeating as many monsters as possible in order to get stronger. Even though there was still a month left, she felt that they should be spending every moment trying to level up. Naofumi, on the other hand, just couldn't agree with her point of view. But before they could sort things out, they're attacked once again by both an amethyst frog and a gray salamander. This time, the monsters are eliminated pretty quickly, though not at all due to stellar teamwork. This in itself would have been a decent scene to showcase the fact that not everything between Raphtalia and Naofumi is always as peachy as the anime makes it seem. Contrary to what we're shown most of the time, there are occasions when they will genuinely disagree with each other, which I honestly wouldn't have minded seeing, considering it would have provided some more diversity to their interactions. Anyway, after this fight, Naofumi's now at level 23, Raphtalia level 27, and Philo 12. Naofumi takes some time to absorb some more monster parts, unlocking him the second Monster User Shield, which, just like the second Slave User Shield, it gives him the ability to adjust his monster's conditioning during growth. And he's able to unlock the third level by absorbing more of Philo's feathers, this one giving even more control over how his monsters grow. But unlike Raphtalia, who he didn't get to see grow at all, he was able to watch Philo grow every step of the way, so much so that Naofumi couldn't help but smile at thinking of all the things that he could gain in exchange for this massive bird. But it's his love for animals back in the real world that made him hesitant to the idea of giving her up, and made him more attached to the idea of keeping Philo as a pet. You see, before he was summoned, Naofumi seemed to always have a bond with wild animals. It was almost like they'd treat him specifically better than any other person. Now, as the days go by, Philo continues to grow like how we see in that short montage from the anime. One day when walking through the village, Naofumi notices that Philo seems to be instinctually drawn to the carts that are around her. A villager then states that it is in fact part of their instincts, so Naofumi makes a deal. Naofumi would help out with repairs to the village, and at the end of the job, he'll receive a cart of his own. It's right after this deal was made that Motoyasu shows up to declare Ryute as his own domain. And though Motoyasu is still a typical douche, it was more clear in the light novel that he was just being manipulated by Mine. When Naofumi had mentioned how ridiculous the taxes were, Motoyasu actually agreed with him. He even suggested that the taxes be dropped. This in turn made Mine absolutely furious. Of course, she didn't want to back down, so she pushed against the decision and put Motoyasu in a rather difficult spot. This hesitation and even the short moment of agreement with Naofumi, whom he seems to wholeheartedly despise, shows that Motoyasu isn't as bad of a person as Mine. No, he's just really dumb and easily manipulated. At least he's shown to have some sort of moral compass, and wouldn't willingly screw over random villagers. Well, at least not yet anyway. This leads to when the woman in black show up, who Naofumi constantly refers to as ninjas. And I'm not gonna lie, their outfit in the manga is significantly better than what they have in the anime. It looks like something straight out of Assassin's Creed, and it's definitely way cooler than these simple hooded robes that we see in the anime. Those designs also keep their gender hidden from Naofumi, since he's shown to initially believe that they are men, which is contrary to the obvious hints in the anime showing that they're women. The duel is then called upon and the race takes place. Turns out that Motoyasu's dragon wasn't even his to begin with. It was just one that was provided for him alongside the carriage that he came in. And to put into perspective how much faster Philo was, Naofumi compares the two, as if it was a motorcycle up against a motorized bicycle, which in every case the motorcycle would easily win. Of course, there was all the cheating, but that just served to make the race slightly more fair, and as we saw, Naofumi won anyway. Naofumi then gets his reward, and he heads off towards the forest with his new cart, though Raphtalia isn't the most accustomed to riding a moving vehicle, so they had to stop often due to her motion sickness. Eventually, they do reach the forest, and they set up camp for the night. While Naofumi is relaxing and looking at the stars, it's here that he has a much needed moment of peace. The forest was so silent and serene that he was able to enjoy the scenery and just be alone with his thoughts. It's here that he came to a simple realization. He wouldn't be at this point if it wasn't for Raphtalia. And although it had only been 2 to 3 weeks since they met, he felt that it had been much longer, as if he'd been around this young woman for a lifetime already. As such, he was determined to become that parental figure to this person he loved as if she was his own daughter, but he just wasn't sure how to do it. That brings us to the end of episode 5, but what the anime didn't show was a little more farming that brought their levels up to 26, 29, and 19, as well as the unlocking of a few more status boosting shields for Naofumi. At this point, Naofumi started to ignore these types of shields. Sure, the stat boosts were helpful, but what he really needed was a good place to farm quality shields. Typically, even after unlocking the abilities of shields like these on screen, he'd just forget about them and likely not even use them. So in terms of growth, Naofumi was in search of something effective, either in a fight or in his everyday tasks, like for compounding or slave growth. He just wasn't concerned anymore with these lesser shields. Now, before we get to the opening scene of episode 6 with the shop owner, the scene where Philo transforms into her humanoid form was actually in the slave trader's shop. You see, Philo had turned into her thicker version, and both Raphtalia and Naofumi were unsure as to what this thing was, cause they'd never seen any Philolio like it. So they rush over to the slave trader to find out what they bought, and he's able to identify Philo as a rare Philolio queen. Due to them rarely ever being spotted, the slave trader requests to do a bit of research overnight with his 2 menacing looking assistants, and surprisingly, Naofumi actually agrees. But only after first giving a stern warning to the slave trader to not harm Philo in any way. So Naofumi leaves, but is shortly summoned back by one of the slave trainers, who brings him to the slave trader's shop, where he finds out that Philo broke 3 cages, as well as injured 3 assistants and 3 monsters. Worried that he wouldn't be able to sell a bad-tempered bird, he starts arguing with the slave trader. All the while, Philo is just trying to get out of her cage and be with Naofumi. Which brings us now to the scene where she finally transforms into her little girl form. Turns out, this isn't just a one-off case. It's actually an ability unique to Philolio kings and queens. But unsure as to how to proceed with Philo, Naofumi just gets her a normal slave seal, then rushes to the shop owner to find some clothes that wouldn't be destroyed after her transformation, cause he really didn't want to be walking around the city with a naked monster girl. Philo preferred being a bird though, but Naofumi insisted on having her stay in her human form, likely because it made everything simpler. However, Philo, being the stubborn girl she was, initially refused to transform when requested by Naofumi. So when they were back at the inn, he activated his curse seal to force her to switch, except this time it didn't work. Philo was able to overpower the normal curse seal and forcibly disable its command authority, which really concerned Naofumi since he didn't want a disobedient member in his party. So once again, he brings Philo back to the slave trader, and he pays for a stronger curse seal. Philo attempts to resist like how we saw in the anime. I mean, it wasn't a pain-free method, but at least now she wouldn't be able to disobey Naofumi. Though seeing Philo go through the pain of having a curse seal activated did take a toll on Naofumi's conscience. Not only did he put her through physical pain, but he also scared her into submission, saying that if she didn't behave, he'd sell her to the slave trader or even feed her bitter medicine that would kill her. Yeah, this may have been a bit too harsh, but of course he wasn't going to do any of that. He was just playing a strict role in order to get the message across and teach Philo to listen to his orders. Now, let's go back to when they were focusing on finding clothing for Philo. They go to see the witch, who's in need of a new magical gemstone, which is the component that allows for the creation of the magical threads needed to create Philo's clothing. She marks on a map an old hideout of an evil alchemist, as it's the location of where they'd likely find the best gemstone. Apparently, this alchemist made a dangerous plant, and that plant was still inside. Of course, when they go to visit the ruins, all they find is an empty chest and a note referring to a seed that should never be taken outside. Obviously, it was a reference to the plant enemy from the next episode. They proceed deeper down the tunnel, which is when they come across the monster that tried to manipulate their trust. It came from a bat known as a voice Gengar, whose intentions were to have them drop their guard and leave them open to attack. Naofumi likened it to being on an adventure from a game that he played that had a similar trap, except this time there was no item he could use to restore everyone's trust. Instead, the witch had to use fast anti-bind, and as we saw, Philo took care of the rest. Naofumi takes the monster corpses, and he absorbs them to unlock both the rat form and the bat form of the voice Gengar shield. The bat form giving the equip bonus of sound wave endurance and a special effect called megaphone. Then the rat form gave blinding endurance and the same special effect, which we see him use in the upcoming battle. Speaking of which, the battle was against what's called a Niue. These were like the Japanese mythological versions of chimeras. They had a monkey's head, a tanuki's body, a tiger's legs, and a snake's tail. Being similar to a chimera, Naofumi was unsure if he could beat it, since the chimera of the second wave required all three heroes together in order to take it down. Not only that, but the Niue was a monster local to the eastern part of the country, and this cave was certainly not its natural habitat, so that raised a couple questions. The reason for it being there was likely because a rich family bought it as a pet, but it escaped and ended up living here. Now, the events of the fight are rather similar. The only differences are that Naofumi took such a significant amount of damage that he actually started to bleed. He even felt some pain. Then, at the end, Philo performed a fatality on the Niue by exploding its head with a flying kick. Naofumi does absorb whatever's left of the Niue, though the shields he unlocked from it remain unknown. They then gather up all the gemstones, get the magical thread from the witch, and then make a visit to the tailor girl to finally get Philo's clothing made. Now, if you remember episode 6, you'll realize that I missed the part in the middle where he does some merchant stuff, sells some medicine to villages in need, and even gets ambushed. Well, the reason for that is due to the light novel's shift in chronology. Only after they get Philo some clothes do they travel to these villages and start helping everyone out. They spent 2 weeks going from village to village, doing deliveries and selling medicine, raising profits and gaining trust at the same time. It's during this time that he decides to investigate the Curse series shield in the selection menu. Remember, he recently unlocked it and he was at least a bit curious, but for some reason he couldn't locate it. All he could find was a description that said, delivers extraordinary power and grief to its holder, should not be touched, so he just gave up. They also spent some time fighting monsters, most of which were unique to the area he was in, resulting in even more new shields getting unlocked. By the end, Naofumi was level 34, Raphtalia 37, and Philo 32. One shield in particular that Naofumi really liked though was the Crystal Ore Shield, giving him proficiency in fine crafting. He also gained the Torrent, Blue Torrent, and Black Torrent shield from a monster called, you guessed it, a Torrent. Then he translated the Apothecary's book, learned the recipes for the medicines and potions within, and let his shield absorb it afterwards, granting him the Book Shield, which increased his magical powers. Considering that this was simply a book containing recipes, the fact that it increases magical power rather than increase compounding or translation skills came as a pleasant surprise to Naofumi. Finally, he absorbed some leftover insecticide and weed killer in order to unlock 5 more new shields: the anti-poison, Gurihosato, medicine, plant fire, and killer insect shield alpha. all of which have rather self-explanatory equip bonuses. But the Gurihosato shield stuck out because it was something that he didn't understand, and having shields with % damage reduction really piqued his interest due to its usefulness. He also figured that he could unlock a beta version of it by changing the type of grass he absorbed when unlocking the alpha. The rest of the time he spent trying to learn magic. He translated the witch's book, but for some reason he just couldn't perform any spells. Sure, he could understand the words, but he was concerned that coming from a world where magic didn't exist hindered his ability to actually handle any magic. Naofumi wanted to learn it as fast as possible, or risk getting left behind, because he figured that learning magic was an essential step to survival both during and after the waves. It's after all this that we finally get to when he's ambushed by a group of bandits. This served to highlight a few more of Naofumi's combat mechanics. Yeah, he actually takes them on himself, in contrast to the brief instances of combat that we see from Raphtalia and Philo. We see him utilize a skill called Change Shield, which allows him to reduce the cooldown between shield changes and quickly shift between shield abilities when needed. For instance, let's say it takes 3 to 5 seconds to switch shields. With the Change Shield skill, he can make a new shield appear in as short as 1 second. But he first must have used a shield ability like Airstrike Shield before being able to activate the Change Shield skill. It can also only be used every 30 seconds. We see him make pretty good use of the ability, as he wastes no time to cast Airstrike Shield, then immediately switch to the Bead Needle Shield to paralyze another bandit. He then switches to the Chimera Viper Shield, where we get our first look at what its hook ability actually does. It works like a crowd control skill, one that sends out the snake from the Viper Shield to wrap and immobilize any enemy within a range of 2 meters. The bind itself does no damage, but combining it with the Snake Fang equip effect makes for a powerful hold and poison combination. Meanwhile, Raphtalia and Philo are taking care of enemies at their own pace. All these bandits were rather weak in comparison to their levels, but the class-up enhanced bodyguard that the bandits hired gave a bit more trouble than what we were shown. He actually managed to sneak up on Raphtalia and take her as a hostage. You see, she was acting rather recklessly and wasn't paying attention to her surroundings. To Naofumi, this was the first time that Raphtalia was in a situation like this, so he wasn't quite sure what to do. He was hesitant to do anything at all. But Philo managed to quickly run up and tackle the bodyguard, freeing Raphtalia and giving her a chance to get her sword and gain her composure. She then proceeded to ruthlessly kill the bodyguard by slicing the back of his neck. That wraps up the ambush scene. Turns out that the merchant they saved was a pretty high-ranking person in the Merchants Guild. That same merchant was later sent by the guild to keep an eye on Naofumi, and because he really took a liking to him, he taught Naofumi the basics on how to use magic, amongst other various things. But focusing on the magic part, by using a magically imbued gemstone, Naofumi was able to get a feel for how to sense and control his flow of mana. Essentially, it was like picturing he had another arm, then concentrating on controlling that arm as if it was one of his own. Eventually, he was able to get the hang of it, and he cast on himself a minor defense buff spell called Fast Guard. He was also taught how to compound and craft magical jewels, and it was through this process that he unlocked various ore shields, with really only the silver ore shield providing anything combat related. Though he did note that the lead ore shield seemed to be taking the place of something else, but he just wasn't sure what. Now, as we finish off episode 6, it would seem that the only things we're missing from the light novels are various combat related mechanics, a few action scenes here and there, and then some character developing interactions. I wouldn't say it's anything too significant, but probably still helpful to know. Normally I'd go on to cover episode 7 as well, as I prefer to do this series in 3 episode intervals, but I don't think I was very good at filtering out what was important and what wasn't from episodes 5 and 6. So in future episodes, I'll try to be more selective with what I share, so that I can cover more of the material that you would likely be more interested in. Anyway, because I didn't get through everything that I wanted, next week's video will be a Shield Hero one as well. So if you're a fan of the series, then you can look forward to that either Saturday or Sunday. But as always, thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!